Hi, welcome to State Department Live, the State Department's interactive web chat platform. Today I'd like to welcome our very special guest, Deputy Assistant Secretary Reuben Brigety, where we will be discussing food security in the Horn of Africa. I would just like to remind everybody, excuse me, to please start typing your questions now in the lower left-hand portion of your screen, and we will get to as many of your questions as we can in the 30 minutes we have. If you would like to continue this conversation after the 30 minutes, you can visit their Facebook page, which is www.facebook.com/state.prm. Thank you, and I'd like to now turn it over to Mr. Brigety. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
And ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. As you are well aware, we are in the midst of what is likely the largest humanitarian crisis in a generation. The Horn of Africa is experiencing its worst drought since 1951, affecting some 12 million people throughout the region. Furthermore, there have been at least 235,000 refugees from Somalia that have fled to principally Ethiopia and Kenya, to a lesser extent Djibouti, since January of this year. The government of the United States takes this challenge very seriously. We have contributed over $560 million since the start of the year to begin to address this crisis. We were also deeply engaged in humanitarian diplomacy as well. So I look forward to taking your questions, and thank you very much for covering this important story.
Can you please tell us what the U.S. is doing as far as aid in the Horn of Africa currently?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, we have contributed several $100 million of assistance. Majority of that is food assistance, but we have also supported a number of humanitarian partners, such as the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, UNICEF, and others that are providing assistance to refugee populations at the Dadaab Refugee Camp Complex in Kenya, the Dadaab Refugee Complex in Ethiopia, and that are also attempting to provide assistance in very limited access areas inside Somalia. We remain deeply concerned because obviously those people that are not getting assisted inside Somalia are at risk of famine and ultimately death. Those that are coming across the borders into Ethiopia and Kenya are arriving in appalling states of physical condition because they haven't eaten for days or weeks at a time. Our colleagues at the U.S. Agency for International Development are doing substantial programming to also assist drought-affected areas of Kenyan nationals and Ethiopian nationals and others in the region that are not refugees but nonetheless are experiencing the consequences of this horrible drought.
Our next question comes from Paula Gisato from Aki Europa. The U.S. has increased its investment in the Horn of Africa with $17 million to help the places affected by the drought and hunger. But how will you make sure that the money gets to the people who need it? And how will you face the political problems that won't let humanitarian aid get to its destiny?
Sure. Well, there are essentially two sorts of assistance as I think you're addressing. The first is assistance to, well, three maybe, I should say. First is to assistance to people that are starving inside Somalia. The second are to refugees, Somali refugees that have fled and that are in camps in Ethiopia and Kenya and elsewhere. And the third are to at-risk populations in Kenya and Ethiopia that are nationals, and I'll address each of those in turn. Inside Somalia, to be frank, it is extraordinarily challenging to provide assistance in a way that we know gets to people that need it. This is principally because Al-Shabaab, the Islamic terrorist group which controls much of South Central Somalia, has essentially prevented aid groups from operating in there since January of 2010. So we are working very carefully, oftentimes on a case-by-case, village-by-village basis to try to negotiate access, working principally through our major humanitarian partners like the World Food Program and others to provide assistance where we can. Although, frankly, we continue to press Al-Shabaab to open up access in an unfettered manner so that we can ensure, as you correctly noted, that our partners can get assistance to those people. And because of our long institutional relationship with these partners, we are confident that they have the monitoring mechanisms and the distribution capacity to ensure the food actually gets to where it needs to go. With regard to the refugee populations, in some ways, this is an easier problem from a humanitarian point of view to address because the populations are concentrated. Those camps are run both by UNHCR and by the local national refugee agencies, so the Department for Refugee Affairs in Kenya and ARA, the Administration for Refugee and Returning Affairs in Ethiopia. We, the U.S. government, fund UNHCR to provide for those camps, and also our colleagues at USAID through the World Food Program do food distributions in those camps, and we have very rigorous monitoring and accountability mechanisms. And we also work very closely with those governmental agencies to ensure that registration is done effectively. Then with regard to assistance to drought-affected nationals of Kenya and Ethiopia, obviously, our colleagues at USAID work very closely with various NGO partners, such as the International Rescue Committee, Oxfam, and others, with whom they have long-standing relationships and long-established grant agreements that have very rigorous reporting requirements, but also working with host governments as well, the governments of Kenya and Ethiopia, to work with them to ensure that that aid is directed where it needs to go. So in short, we actually have very high confidence that both in Kenya and Ethiopia, for the host populations and to the refugee populations, that food is getting in an adequate manner and getting into the populations that need it. The challenge is in South Central Somalia, where we're dealing with, frankly, a not cooperative partner in Al-Shabaab.
This is a follow-up from Paula, and she wants to know, many people leave Somalia every day to go to Kenya, where they live in camps for refugees that have grown beyond their capacity. Is there any specific aid to these camps, and is there a plan to get the refugees back to their country?
The challenge with Somalis that are leaving Somalia to become refugees in Ethiopia and Kenya is a profound one. Probably no place signifies this more than the Dadaab refugee camp complex in Kenya, which was built for 90,000 people in 1991, now holds well over 490,000 people. It will almost surely be at 500,000 people before the end of the year. There are at least 6,000 residents of Dadaab that are third-generation refugees. That is, they are the children of people that first sought refuge there some 20 years ago. We know that this is an enormous problem. We remain grateful to the government of Kenya, which has hosted this large population, indeed this growing population, for many years. The challenge is finding a durable solution for these populations. And when we do refugee work, there are essentially three durable solutions that are sought. The first is return, so that refugees are actually able to go back to the home country from which they fled. The second is local integration, so that refugees are given some sort of permanent legal status, citizenship or something short of that in the countries to which they flee. And the third is resettlement, so that as refugees are taken from the refugee camps in the countries where they first sought asylum and resettled in some other third country like the United States or Canada or Australia or elsewhere. The problem for the Somali refugees is that none of those three durable solutions are available at this time. Obviously, South Central Somalia is in turmoil, has been in turmoil for 20 years, and is not likely for those people to go back. And certainly, we would strenuously object to any forceful move to send people back to Somalia against their will, where their lives may be in danger. The government of Kenya has not provided options for local integration for Somalis that have moved there. That is, they've not offered them citizenship or permanent work status or others. And with regard to resettlement, though we in the United States have accepted tens of thousands of Somali refugees over the years, and other countries have accepted many as well, just given the numbers, you actually cannot resettle your way out of that problem. There are about 15 million refugees in the world, and of those 15 million, only about 100,000 or so will be resettled to some third country. And of those 100,000, about 70 to 75,000 come to the United States. So we actually can only use resettlement globally in a very selective way to resettle just those that are the most vulnerable. So having said all that, we in the U.S. government, working with partners in the region, are beginning to think of ways to engage in dialogues with our various colleagues to try to think through is there some other creative, non-traditional solution option for this large numbers of refugees that have been displaced for decades, so that people have an option for living a more normal life and have some hope for their future.
Great. I just want to remind everybody to please make sure that if you have a question, to type it into the lower left-hand side of your screen. And if you would like to continue this conversation, you can go on Twitter and use the # Horn of Africa at USA in Francais. Our next question comes from Heather Murdoch from Bloomberg News, Kigali. Is the famine in Somalia still spreading, and what do you think the drought in the region will abate?
The famine in Somalia is spreading, and this is actually a very important point. Though drought affects the entire region, famine is only been identified in the portions of south central Somalia that are controlled by al-Shabaab. As you well know, famine has a very specific definition by the UN, which is a combination of crude mortality rates, access to food security, and acute malnutrition for children under 5. So if you take a look at the data that FuseNet and FSNAU, which are basically both UN-sponsored food security monitoring mechanisms, have aggregated in their projections, one anticipates that overall the level of food insecurity as a result of the drought throughout the region is anticipated to abate sometime this fall, probably around October, late October-ish. However, we anticipate that famine will spread and indeed will cover all of south central Somalia in the same time period. So there's actually a diverging trend between the entire region, which is expected to see the effects of the drought be mitigated in the coming months, whereas in south central Somalia, which is controlled by al-Shabaab, the effects of the famine will increase. And again, that is largely a factor of the inability of aid groups to provide substantial assistance in these areas where people are affected because they are not given access by al-Shabaab.
Our next question comes from Eric Kabira from the New York Times, Rwanda. What should African countries do to avoid food insecurity?
Well, to be frank, the food insecurity issue is a little beyond my field since I deal mostly with refugees, but I can say that we in the U.S. government have launched a new initiative called Feed the Future, which is meant to do a variety of things to partner not only with countries in Africa, but other countries elsewhere to address this issue of food security. Clearly, we know a couple of things are important. First, access to trade and opening borders for trade so that food can move not only in a country but indeed throughout the region, where one country may have an excess supply of grain and other countries may be grain insecure, is one way in which food security can be improved. And we know that regrettably that most African countries actually have more trade with Europe or North America than they do with each other. So improving trade access is a very important aspect. Obviously, there are any number of agricultural policies which are quite important, things like crop insurance for farmers, so they know they can have a fixed return on their crops, and they know that they're not going to be completely wiped out if they happen to suffer from a difficult season. But these are all things that we know from best practices work in other parts of the world, and we also know that obviously, given growing demographic trends in many parts of the developing world, particularly in Africa, getting food security right is vital. Just because there are places that are more sensitive to climatological disruption, or just because there are places that have growing populations of people, does not mean that we have to anticipate that famines will reoccur. With proper planning, with proper trade policies, with proper fiscal interventions, and most importantly with proper cooperation among states, we know that this is a problem that can be addressed in the future.
The next question is, the people and the governments of Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti have been hosting hundreds of thousands of Somali refugees, even while they are dealing with severe food shortages in their own countries. What is the U.S. doing to assist them?
We have expressed enormous appreciation to the governments of Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti for their hosting these populations for many, many years. We know that it is extraordinarily challenging in the best of times, even more so under the current circumstances of the drought. We have sent numerous high-level delegations to the region to work with these countries to understand what more they need from us, from the international community, to continue to host these populations. I am heading to the region again this Saturday. It will be my 4th trip there since early June, having spent most of my summer in the Horn of Africa to help work with countries in the region on this issue. So we clearly are working very closely to ensure that they have funding to support UNHCR to assist these refugees. And then we're also doing what we can to step up our assistance to local host communities in these countries that have hosted these populations for many, many years, to ensure that the assistance that is going to the refugees is frankly not leaving host communities bereft of their own needs as well.
The next question comes from Paula Guisado from Aqui Europa. At the end of July, Oxfam complained about the slow and inadequate help from Europe to the zone. Do you think the European Union is behaving properly according to the situation, or they could do a bigger effort for the Horn of Africa? And what is your opinion of the international help in general?
Well, this is clearly, as I mentioned, a massive humanitarian disaster of epic proportions. We have stepped up to the plate. We know that individual European countries have done a great deal. In my last 2 trips to the Horn of Africa, I traveled with delegations of ambassadors from European countries and other major donor countries like Canada and Australia, took plane loads of these senior emissaries down to camps. They clearly were very impressed and sent messages back to their capitals as well. And we've been able to see, as I say, individual contributions from countries which have been really quite generous. We are grateful for what the European Union has done thus far. We are confident that they will continue to rise to meet the challenge. With regard to the response of the international community as a whole, we have seen some really quite generous pledges. The Organization of the Islamic Conference, for example, just last week pledged $350 million, with Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan expressing the hope to get that pledge up to $500 million. These are gestures for which we are very grateful. Yet it's important to know that the overall humanitarian appeal for some $2 billion still is about $1 billion underfunded. And that's just based on what we anticipate the projections being of the need between now and the end of the year. If anything happens such that those projections actually prove to fall short and things become worse, then clearly we will all have to step up to the plate. But I am confident that the international community will recognize the grave severity of the situation. We will continue to remain engaged in terms of very aggressive diplomacy to ensure that countries continue to contribute, and we hope that we will be able to turn the corner on this sooner rather than later.
The next question comes from Hamza Ndangiza from Radio Contact FM. Don't you think that your efforts have been channeled toward fighting famine when it breaks rather than ensuring long-term food security?
No. And in fact, it's worth noting that in this particular crisis, while there are some 12 million people that are drought affected, we frankly would be seeing many more people on the brink of starvation, particularly in Ethiopia, were it not for the very aggressive efforts of the government of Ethiopia in partnership with our colleagues at USAID, who have been funding something called the Productive Safety Net Program, or PSNP, which is meant to help build resilience in host communities by improving grain stocks, improving their ability to germinate seeds and prepare for situations of more austere farming conditions. So this is actually in some ways a success story in the context of this current drought, which is not widely known and not widely discussed. We would be seeing a far worse situation, not only in Somalia, but particularly in Ethiopia and Kenya, were it not for efforts on behalf of both governments in partnership with us and other donors to ensure the resilience of these communities. The real challenge that we see isn't just in terms of dealing with climatological conditions as they occur. It is how you have governance which supports food security in the long run. So in places like Ethiopia and Kenya, where the government is taking these populations, this issue very seriously, we don't see as much of a problem. In places like South Central Somalia, where al-Shabaab has done exactly the opposite of what should be done, for example, kicking out all humanitarian food organizations since January 2010, that's where you see famine. And indeed, if you took a map of the places that are controlled by al-Shabaab, which represent the worst governance in the region, and a map of the places where famine exists, and you put one on top of the other, they would be directly correlated. So in short, and in conclusion, let me just say that we have been taking this issue of fighting famine very seriously, and we're glad that the situation is not as worse as it might have otherwise been.
The next question comes from Sylvanus Karamara from Voice of America, Kigali. I would like to know the scale of the contingent support being availed to the people in need and how this assistance would reach the targeted group.
I'm not sure that I understand the question entirely. Let me ask if you just clarify, and I'll be happy to sort of take it again in turn.
Great. The next question comes from Crispin Wakesa from the Star Kenya. Are there long-term strategies that the U.S. government is working out to help the people in the affected areas and avoid a recurrence of this?
There are. As I mentioned, we have set up an Office of Food Security both here in the State Department and a Bureau for Food Security at the U.S. Agency for International Development, both of which work in our Feed the Future campaign, as I mentioned before, which is meant to help foster long-term food security. I can tell you that Secretary Clinton, on the one hand, is absolutely committed to doing whatever is necessary to abate the current crisis, but is equally committed to ensuring that we do not find ourselves in the same cycle over and over again. And by we mean not only the United States, but also our partners in the region. Because what we don't want to see is a combination of poor governance, poor market conditions, and poor climatological conditions all combine to put millions of people at risk of food insecurity in the future. As I already mentioned, we have some success in the fact that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that are not going to starve because of interventions that have been put in place in the last 5 years. We hope, obviously, that number will be even smaller when the next form of cyclical droughts arrive. And most importantly, we hope that the political situation in South Central Somalia changes such that we don't see famine occurring because of irresponsible actors which will not take responsible steps to ensure that food can reach the people that need it.
Great. Our next question comes from Gabawa Ngusi. Many say that famine occurs in the region mainly due to political failures and wrong policies of the countries in the region. What do you say about this?
Well, as I mentioned before, this is objectively true. There is a very specific definition of famine. Although there are many districts, places in the region which are food insecure, the only places where famine is occurring is in the places that are held by al-Shabaab. And indeed, the only places where famine is expected to spread are places that are held by al-Shabaab. And the reason that is the case is because al-Shabaab is taking improper actions with regard to humanitarian response today. So with the proper governance and the proper response mechanisms, yes, famine can be avoided. We can't help the climate, but we can take steps to address both the market conditions and access to help with those who need it.
Our next question is, we have a few more minutes. I just want to remind everybody that if you would like to ask your questions, please make sure you put them in the left-hand corner of your screen. And we will get to as many of the questions as we have. We have about 10 minutes remaining. So my next question is, it's actually a repeat. Oh, goodness. Sorry, everybody. Some have said the food crisis in the Horn of Africa could have been averted. Why wasn't more done to stop it?
Well, let me say that we knew from as early as August of 2010 that the region was going to be in a chronic food crisis. We had this information from FuseNet and also from FSNAU. USAID started pre-positioning food stocks in the region as early as October of 2010. And as I mentioned, certainly from a refugee assistance side, I personally, and as well as our other officials, have been deeply engaged with governments in the region. I have probably made easily 8 or 9 trips to the region since the start of this year. What was not anticipated was that al-Shabaab, even faced with a catastrophic famine, would not let assistance get to those people who needed it. And that is a factor that, frankly, despite our most aggressive diplomacy, we have limited control over until al-Shabaab decides that they are going to put their people first as opposed to whatever their particular political motivations may be. There's only so much the international community can do to assist. Now, we are pushing very hard to help them see the situation differently, and also to work with local actors. So I would say that, as I say, we knew the situation was coming. We knew it would be bad. We clearly are seeing the ramifications of just how bad it is. We are grateful that we've been able to respond with a fair degree of alacrity, both to support countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti to assist their own host populations, and also to assist the refugees as they come across. I'm very proud of our international partners such as UNHCR and the World Food Program that have responded so aggressively in terms of providing assistance as the numbers of refugees coming across the border has increased dramatically. But the tough nut to crack still, as it were, is providing assistance inside Somalia.
Okay. The next question is, conditions in the overcrowded camps are poor, and there are reports of rapes inside the camps as well as among refugee populations who are living outside the camps waiting to be registered. What is being done to protect the refugees?
We take this situation of gender-based violence extremely seriously. The Vice President of the United States' wife, Dr. Jill Biden, was just recently in Dadaab, met with a number of women refugees. We are clearly aware of these reports as well. And there are a number of situations, reasons that are contributing to it that we think. One is, the first is the one you just cited, which is the large numbers of refugees that were camped spontaneously on the outskirts of Dadaab. We've worked very closely with the government of Kenya to actually get them to open up the extension to the EFO camp. On one of my last trips to Kenya, I was privileged to accompany Kenyan Prime Minister Odinga as he toured the camp, and was very proud and very grateful that on the spot he declared that EFO would be opened. And we have since seen tens of thousands of refugees moved in there, which is something that we anticipate, once they are registered and once they are in more formal settings, will decrease the overall vulnerability of women to sexual gender-based violence. We are working with a number of partners, such as the International Rescue Committee, to ensure that women have access to gender-specific latrines, to ensure they have access to rape counseling, to ensure that there is sufficient reporting as well, and also ensure that the camp conditions are secure. When you have these numbers of people in this sort of situation, obviously protection of women and girls is always a challenge, but I can absolutely assure you that we take it as a highest priority, and it's something that we are watching very closely.
We have time for one more question, and
Sure.
It comes from Paula Gizzato. Many people leave Somalia every day to go to Kenya, where they live in camps for refugees that have grown beyond their capacity. Is there any specific aid to these camps, and is there a plan to get the refugees back to their country?
Well, as I mentioned before, we are very much aware of the overcrowded nature of these camps. The Dadaab is some 6 or 7 times larger than it was originally planned. The camps in Dolado had 50,000 refugees when I was there in February. They now are 3 times that size, which is 150,000. Anyone who's worked with refugees or knows refugees know that there actually is no substitute for being able to go home. We obviously hope that the situation in South Central Somalia will change in the near future so that people can go home. Failing that, we are in very close discussions with the governments of Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti to try to think through new and creative ways in which we can assist these camps, not only we in the U.S. government, but indeed with many other governments around the world, so that people actually have some hope for their future, some option for education, some option for their livelihood, so that the strains on the local communities can be reduced, and so that people can move on with their lives in a productive way.
Great. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. It was a real pleasure. Is there anything you'd like to say to close out?
I'm just very grateful to all of you who are covering this story. This is clearly one of the most profound humanitarian stories of our lifetime. It's something that the world needs to continue to know about, and we're very grateful for you for doing your job to raise awareness of this critical issue. Thank you.
Great. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today at State Department Live. Like I said before, if you would like to continue this conversation, you can go to facebook.com/state.prm, or you can go on Twitter and use #Horn of Africa at USA in Francais. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day.